In 2077, what makes someone a criminal? Getting caught.
Unsurprisingly, the world of Cyberpunk is peppered with a rich and vast history and intricate lore. From its humble beginnings as a tabletop RPG dreamed up by Mike Pondsmith in 1988, boasting over 4 decades worth of story. And let's be honest, for all his wonderful world-building abilities, when you're writing about advanced cyberware in the 1980s pre-mainstream internet, it's gonna go off the rails a bit. Therefore, CD Projekt Red wisely decided to condense this down into a streamlined version called The World of Cyberpunk, available in the description. However, for all of you who don't feel like picking up the book or the tabletop RPG and numerous pieces of supplemental literature, understanding Cyberpunk can be daunting to someone who just wants the key points of the backstory necessary to enjoy the game, which is what I aim to cover in this video. What is important to understand is that we already have an understanding of Cyberpunk 2077's plot, revolving around the playable character V, a mercenary in Night City who unwittingly stumbles into the possession of a one-of-a-kind implant that is the key to immortality during a mission gone awry for shifty-eyed fixer Dexter Shawn. Also, somewhat unsurprisingly, immortality draws the attention of those in power, including the enigmatic cyber spectre of the rocker boy, Johnny Silverhand. So, in this video, I will be covering 1. The important keynotes on the humble beginnings of Night City to present day. 2. Johnny Silverhand's own journey and how it holds direct ties to the fabled immortality chip. 3. Who created the chip and why? And how does it bestow immortality upon a user? And most importantly, what is the story of Cyberpunk 2077 so far before V arrives at the chip's acquisition? Well, to understand that, we have to go back to the beginning of Night City.
So seize the day, then set it on fire.
Night City. What does it mean to you? How well do you know its history? Who was Richard Knight?
The story of Cyberpunk can't fully be done justice without first exploring the history of its location, Night City. In 1994, an enterprising fellow named Richard Knight had a dream to build the perfect city. The United States itself was in disarray, and although California was one of the quote-unquote free states, roving booster gangs terrorized a lot of its towns. So Knight decided to purchase the entire town of Morro Bay, which actually exists as a real-world town and lies between LA and San Francisco. However, in the Cyberpunk universe, it too was overrun by gangs. With a timely army intervention driving out the gangs, plus a lot of capital and corporate backing, Knight transformed the sleepy Bayside town into a corporate haven. Knight went on to name it Coronado City. Although Coronado was a successful tax haven for corporations and a flourishing endeavor, just 4 years after its construction, tragedy struck. Knight himself was murdered by unknown assailants. Now, popular conjecture was that Knight was assassinated by opportunistic crime syndicates, which would seem logical, as the crime syndicates promptly set up shop and took over control of the city. Now, despite public outcry in response to the death of Knight, the mob, now filling the power vacuum, had turned the once prosperous Coronado City into a den of crime. Prostitution, assault, drug trafficking, and cyber terrorism became commonplace, and as the mob's piece de resistance, they boldly renamed Coronado City to Night City in a mock memory of the deceased Richard M. Knight, who they whacked. Now, after a decade of ever-increasing crime and death rates, the corporations had had enough and set out for their own final gambit to wrestle control back from the mob. In a coordinated series of hits that would make Walter White blush, unidentified mercenaries systematically executed every single mob boss, and a new city council was established in their stead. Within the next few months and years, the most devastated parts of Night City were pacified, razed, and rebuilt. Thus, corporate reign had begun.
Well, on that note, that's it for today's Info Flash. Sleep tight, Night City. The grass ain't greener anywhere else.
Now, after the tumultuous beginnings of Night City, it actually hit a golden age of 2020. But as they say, absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. Outside of Night City, the collapse of the wider United States had been going on for decades, with 3 corporate wars being fought between the years of 1990 and 2016, with many states in the US ceding and declaring themselves free states from the government. Unsurprisingly, California was one of them, and the victors were the very mega corporations themselves, who now held more authority than most world governments, the US being no exception. Untethered by pesky laws, corpos became the new royalty in town, and Night City being the jewel of prosperity in California, it was only a matter of time until those vying for power came to a head. Thus, the Fourth Corporate War. Although there were many other wars of note and occurrences in between, in 2021, Arasaka and Militech specifically had been hired by opposing factions to fight on their behalf. At first, it was covert and largely resulted in assassinations occurring on each side, but before long, it was a full-scale conflict. Now, the conflict really came to a head, for Night City at least, in 2023, when a nuclear warhead went off on top of Arasaka's building. But how did this occur, and why was Johnny Silverhand, of all people, caught up in the middle?
And that chip in your head, the one thanks to which Johnny lives inside your mind. Well, that's a story for another time.
Backpedaling a moment all the way to the 90s, Johnny was originally a soldier for the US government. In 1990, while serving during the Central American conflict, he lost his arm, as well as his faith in the military, as he witnessed what he believed was an unjust bloodbath. Congruently, Johnny wouldn't fight a corrupt war, so he returned home to Night City and began his life anew. The military had changed his life forever, and he even changed his name to Johnny Silverhand. His last name would represent the cybernetic arm that replaced the arm he lost in the war, and his every movement would remind him of his mission, rebellion. Instead of a gun, as now fabled rocker boy, mostly Johnny fought authority with the power of song and his trusty guitar. During this time, he helped spearhead the powerful cyberpunk movement, merging the popular cybernetics culture of the time with the 1970s punk rock, laced with extreme anti-establishment sentiment. With corporations controlling much of the data flow, this was one of the most effective methods of raising awareness of the corrupt corporations. Also, in large part due to his popularity thanks to his chart-topping band, Samurai. However, Johnny's efforts were not always peaceful. In the 21st century, Johnny fell in love with an extremely gifted netrunner named Alt Cunningham. Alt had created a program that could take a person's consciousness and upload it to the net and explore it independent of their body, effectively granting them digital immortality. In 2013, everything changed for Johnny and Alt, however, as he was on a walk with Alt Cunningham when she was suddenly kidnapped by thugs working for the mega corporation Arasaka. They wanted to use Alt for her incredible talent as a programmer. They planned to have her develop a software called the Soul Killer that would be able to download any netrunner's mind. Now, this was a dangerous software that would have killed anyone whose brain they wanted to download. In turn, Johnny made a plan that required precise timing. He gathered a strike team to infiltrate the Arasaka offices so that he could save Alt. On top of that, he called in a favor from all the members of his band, who had broken up by that stage. Samurai gathered and performed an entirely free show. Now, the show just so happened to be right in front of the Arasaka Tower in Night City. The strike team made it there just moments too late. They found Alt Cunningham dead. However, while her body was left as a husk, her mind became trapped inside of the Arasaka mainframe, and Johnny planned to get it back. Years later, in 2023, Johnny, alongside 2 legendary solos, Rogue and Morgan Blackhand, led an assault on the Arasaka HQ in Night City with the intention of ending the Fourth Corporate War and freeing Alt. Johnny went to find Cunningham, but there were more than a few obstacles in his way. The biggest was actually physically big, a Borg named Atom Smasher. A once man was now more machine than flesh. Legend has it Atom Smasher gunned down Silverhand. His body was never found though, because Militech, a company fighting against Arasaka, launched their attack at the same time. They dropped a bomb on the Arasaka building and there was nothing left to find. Although it should be noted, as mentioned in Cyberpunk Red, there is a rumor that Johnny's body is frozen beneath the old Arasaka HQ. Which brings us to the time of the Red. However, before we jump forward, there's a few key details to unpack here. One, Alt Cunningham had created a digital form of immortality that was weaponized by Arasaka. 2, she was killed and Johnny attempted to rescue her from Arasaka HQ, however, she escaped into the net. 3, Johnny himself was killed and his body may be in the Arasaka HQ, but as we've seen his digital ghost, clearly he's benefited from living in a chip thanks to what we can only assume is Alt's program. And 4, Morgan Blackhand was last seen battling Atom Smasher atop Arasaka HQ. As we've seen the full Borg Smasher in 2077, it's been strongly hinted at during in-game art and trailers that Blackhand also survived.
Come on, really think they give a rat's dick how you look?
Beyond the black wall.
The time of the Red referred to the period after the nuke had dropped by Militech, and this is due to the radiation fallout particles that tinted the skies red. Much of the time period between 2023 and 2077 follows the devastation of Night City, the stagnation of technology, the building of the Black Wall to contain breaches in the internet as rogue AI ran rampant, and Netwatch decided that quarantine was their best bet, otherwise they would have to abandon the internet entirely. Also, Alt Cunningham's digital form sought safe haven behind the Black Wall, and also the rebuilding of Night City marked a slow 35 years to normality. And although I'm skipping many events in this synopsis to keep things streamlined, the crescendo of this time period lies with the corporations that were finding their own foothold during the time. As they coalesced back into powerhouses of yore, the people of Night City by 2077 began again to decry the oppressive nature of the all-powerful corpos treading where they pleased, which brings us to Cyberpunk's events during 2077.
When uncertainty struck the global economy, investors pulled their funding, leaving most establishments unfinished. It's one of those places where expectations and reality collided, resulting in a heap of disappointment.
With the rise of corpos and technology brought back the rebellious attitudes to meet it. Cyberware was once again a hot commodity, and so with the two subcultures flourishing, cyberpunk came back in vogue, as well as the sentiment of where's Johnny specifically, a question that relates to the disappearance of the rocker boy, but also directly tied to the hopes of the peoples in Night City, suffering under the yoke of oppression once again. So that is the story so far. We already know V, a mercenary, stumbles into a job gone awry to reclaim a chip from Arasaka. We now know potentially why it contains Johnny's cyber ghost. Also, no doubt what Johnny would want in game: to free Alt Cunningham and perhaps reclaim his body on ice, or perhaps upload his consciousness, or perhaps another body. We also know the colored history of Night City, which leaves us to one question. As stated in previous trailers, you don't have to specifically side with Johnny in-game, much to his chagrin. So what will you choose? Johnny Silverhand's rebellion, or perhaps choosing your own path?
Like everyone in Cyberpunk 2077, he has his own agenda. You'll decide if he'll be your ally or your enemy. And that chip in your head, the one thanks to which Johnny lives inside your mind, well, that's a story for another time.